My name is Trevor Baxter. I'm Director of IT Innovation at King's College London, and I'm also the Chair of the UCLan London Group. I'm introducing this to you today instead of our CEO, Deborah Green, who unfortunately tested positive for COVID a couple of days ago, so was unable to make the meeting today. So we have for you a discussion group and a panel to talk through these issues, and we have in front of us 4 panel members, and I'll introduce them one by one. On the far end is Dr. Rachel Bence, who's the CIO from Queen Mary University London. Then we have David Robinson, who's a CISO from HEFESTIS, and he'll explain that later on. Adrian Ellison, who's the Pro Vice-Chancellor and CIO at the University of West London. And we have James Crooks, who is the Learning and Information Director from the University of Central Lancashire. So to get the session started, we thought the best thing to start with was some kind of state of the nation on what we're all facing. And to do that, who better to talk to than a CISO? So David, would you like to give us a state of the nation on what we're talking about here?
Shall I stand?
Yeah.
Good morning, very nearly afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody. My name is David Robertson. You may get a hint from the accent that I work from Scotland. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for a shared service with universities across Scotland, where I actually work with all of the universities in Scotland, at least 85% of them, to improve their cybersecurity. And we do that across the nation in a joined-up way as members of the university and college community. Now, very quickly, I've been asked to introduce what is the state of the nation for cybersecurity. This is going to be an authentic, straightforward answer about the HEFE sector. According to Microsoft, the higher and further education sector is the most attacked sector in the United Kingdom, globally. And also, it is the most affected by cybersecurity incidents of any sector in the United Kingdom and globally. The reason that I'm here starting first is so that I can give you an honest Scottish appraisal. We're doomed. Doomed, I tell you. Now, we have 4 equally salubrious people who are going to talk today about why you're not so doomed, and hopefully I'll be able to talk at the end of the presentation about what we've been doing in Scotland, which may be of interest to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So that gives you an idea of the situation that we're actually talking about. But amongst our panel members, we have somebody whose institution recently suffered some of these challenges. So James, I wonder if you could tell us what happened at your university.
Thanks, everyone. I can't hear myself particularly well. Hopefully you all can hear me. There or thereabouts. Are we able to? I've got thumbs up and sort of wavering hands, so I'll carry on. That's somewhere in the middle there is probably the right balance. So yeah, I'm from the University of Central Lancashire, and just over a year ago, in fact, almost to the day, that we were hit by a particularly brutal ransomware attack that merrily went on its way encrypting the vast majority of our Windows servers before we decided to make the really terrifying call, in fact, to shut the entire university down, go completely offline, which is a call that I guess none of us ever want to have to make, and it's a really difficult call. And there was such an immediate sort of response from the Vice-Chancellor's group and the senior stakeholders across the organisation about what on earth was going on, how quickly would our stuff get back online. And yes, it was really sort of quite a tense few hours at the start that felt like weeks. But at the same time goes so quickly. And I think a year on, looking back, we are now in such a better position from a cybersecurity perspective as an organisation. We thought we were okay. We thought we were doing pretty well in the cyberspace. We'd had some really good sort of positive audits around our cyber posture and various other sort of external reviews. but there's nothing like a real incident to kind of open your eyes and make you think, wow, okay, this is what it feels like. This is how hard it can really be. And as I say, we've emerged, much stronger and much more robust, and are in a position now where I can say, sort of hand on heart, that we definitely put security at the heart of our organisation.
Okay, it sounds like a very interesting position to be in. How did it affect the university as a whole and the students?
Well, it was incredible, really, because the weekend it happened was just as the UK was to emerge from, I think, the third national lockdown on the Monday, which is probably the reason why these malicious actors picked that particular weekend, just to make it extra spicy for us. But the attack, we discovered it on the Sunday, and had a full day of trying to sort of figure out exactly what it was, how far the extent of it went, and how we could approach Monday morning, when we were expecting a significantly higher number of students to be not just trying to get online, but also back on campus trying to log on to our university computers, which was a daunting prospect. So, through some really sort of well-articulated prioritisation exercises with, senior stakeholders, we're really focused on getting some restoration of some sort of capability for our students as quickly as possible, who, other than not being able to log on to Blackboard at the time, didn't really know what was going on. So, there was a big comms aspect to this as well, around, not wanting to sow panic, but educate the community about what was happening and what we were working on and what it meant for them. So it really was a sort of cross-institutional response to dealing with this crisis, and it was hard. But by Monday we'd managed to restore access to certain things, but against the backdrop of that sort of slight sense of insecurity about whether we were bringing back systems in a safe way, and whether we'd actually dealt with the cause of this thing, which I guess is another thing that we'll go on to talk about.
Yeah. So. Adrian, in terms of your organisation, how would something similar have affected you, and what are your thoughts around this?
So thanks, Trevor, and just check, can you all hear me at the back? Thumbs up as well, brilliant. So like James, my institution also suffered from a number of ransomware attacks. We were particularly unlucky, I guess. We had one weekend. It knocked us out probably for 3 to 5 days, and just we'd recovered everything. Our lovely hackers, who were still rooted away in the bowels of our systems, decided to do it all again, only this time much worse. So we really did learn the lessons. And I think what we're going to try and do this morning is to share with you what those lessons are, so that you can go away with some real good advice. And I think the first of those lessons is, as David said, we're all doomed. I can't do it with that beautiful accent, but we're all doomed. So we've got to start planning right now. It's never too early to plan for the day that your institution, your organisation is going to suffer some kind of big cyber attack. And David, if I'm right, I think even just last week, 3 more universities were hit. This is becoming a week-by-week event. So it's, as somebody once said to me a few years ago, it's not if you're going to have this, it's when it's going to happen. So I think one of the key lessons is, start planning right now. Rachel, you've just done, haven't you, a tabletop exercise around how to cope with these sorts of things?
Yes, we have. Can everyone hear me? Because I can't hear any. Okay. So, yes, we have started to do some quite detailed planning exercises with our security partners that we've engaged with. So, when I joined Queen Mary 3 years ago, we had a really quite sketchy cybersecurity team, if you could even call them that. We're now finding that we need probably around 9 people in our cybersecurity team, and still that feels a bit tight. So I think, as the gentlemen have said, it's incredibly important to have a well-staffed security team, and that is a real challenge at the moment because of the the availability of the resource on the market is really hard to get hold of. But having said that, I think we're a lot more mature than we were. We also suffered a ransomware attack a couple of years back isolated to one of the schools in our area, which took about 2 to 3 weeks to recover from. We did though, and I think one of the lessons is number one, try and manage as much of your estate as you physically can, which is really important. And also, as we've said, prepare by having some quite detailed desktop exercises. So if you can align it with your crisis comms plan and process, which normally would divide the organisation up into gold, silver and bronze teams, gold being gold command, who basically oversee the communications at the university or organisational level, silver being more your sort of directors and heads of estates and IT, and at the bottom, bronze. In a case of a cyber incident, it would probably be the IT team that would be restoring the services. So we've now done an incident preparation exercise at bronze level with the IT team, which has revealed that we've got quite technically good people, but we don't necessarily have the best sort of processes in place. So that's a lesson that came out of that. It's really important to have a really, really strong incident response plan. And yesterday, with our senior executive team, chaired by our Vice-Chancellor, we actually conducted a security exercise based on you've lost all your systems and exams are next week, and what are you going to do? And there was a bit of tumbleweed then, and but I think, we did get to the point where the first question is, how are you going to do your comms? Because if you've lost everything, how are you going to let all your staff and students know you've got a crisis? And obviously the answer is have an external tech service or something that can get a message out quickly and test it. So I think that's the first thing, is have you got a comms plan, and have you got a comms vehicle that would allow you to communicate in a crisis? So that would be my top tip. Have one of those ready. If you haven't got one, do it tomorrow, because it's not that difficult, and I would recommend that. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now and have that.
Rachel, you make a number of really good points there, and one is about getting engagement of the senior team. So your VC was involved in that exercise, and I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure James can, when it all falls away, you are up with your VC, with your board of governors, because service is lost. It's much better to get that level of engagement right now. Get them to really understand what the risks are, get them to then start planning a way through to dealing with those. Because that's a difficult conversation, but it's much worse when you're right in the thick of it. James, you agree?
Absolutely, Adrian. And I think one of the things that we realised quite quickly was that we couldn't really rely on a lot of the business continuity plans that were already in place, because most of them kind of said, well, we'll just move we'll just get laptops, or we'll just, they all relied on some level of IT, and we had no IT. So there was we had to really work with our senior stakeholders really carefully to try and sort of build those plans almost on the fly. And that's tough when you're also dealing with a crisis and trying to restore services safely and securely. But I think that is such a realisation that is now sort of really driving the development of our business continuity planning. And the other aspect of all of that is helping business leaders across our organisations understand what systems and services are supporting their business, because there were lots of people who just said, well, we need the VLE back, or we need our intranet back, and we need these, but without really understanding how those things relate to onboarding of students and enrolment and various activities like that. And I think that collective understanding across the organisation of what systems and services support business processes, without sort of going too heavy on enterprise architecture, that's exactly what we need and what we're doing now.
And certainly when we recovered from our incidents, that absolutely helped us prioritise the order to bring those services back. What had the most student impact? What were the big dependencies? I mean, the one thing we lost was our Active Directory. That powers everything. You've no Active Directory, nobody logs on to anything. And James, you make it a good point about, planning for loss of IT. I suspect everybody's disaster recovery plan has a chapter in it about plan for no IT, but the reality is nobody's actually done it. They don't believe they're not going to get any IT. And it's not until you actually take it away and nothing works. Certainly when we had our second ransomware attack, the only action I could authorise was unplug everything, completely disconnect us from the outside world until we have absolutely got to the bottom of what's going on. There was nothing. And I think, Rachel, that's something, unless you've been there, is very hard to understand from a business perspective.
And actually, you can lose things that you weren't expecting. I don't know whether you lost tills in the student union and things like that. We're just about to embark on a network upgrade, and I was having exactly that conversation this morning. We're doing it on a Saturday, but people are in on a Saturday, students are there, they expect the union shop to work, they expect to be able to get in and out of their accommodation, and even though it's only a short break, one hopes, it's incredible what you do. And to your point about having to build up that sort of matrix of dependencies, that's so important. I really think that, and that's why architects are in such short supply, as well as cybersecurity people, because everybody needs their estate mapping. And to be honest, not many of us have really done that in sufficient detail to be able to do impact analysis. So I would really recommend having a look at that.
I mean, David, you must have been helping other organisations do this to prepare.
Regrettably, yes. I'm not quite sure whether I'm a help or a jinx. I have certainly been involved in many cybersecurity incidents supporting the HEFE sector in my years as a Chief Information Security Officer. The first thing that I will say is that, yes, it is horrible, and we have seen organisations cease to exist as a digital entity as the effect of a cybersecurity incident. But we've also seen something which I think is much more powerful, which is the resilience of the individuals concerned in sharing these lessons so that we can all learn from them and we can all build from them. Indeed, that's one of the main reasons why we came into existence. I'm actually involved in one right now. But they're not down. They refuse to lie down. They have made sure that even though they've been hit by one of, shall we say, an international threat actor group, services are still running for staff and students. They've protected the areas that were affected. They are up and they're standing. Yes, it's painful, and yes, they've got an awful lot of work to do, but they've actually been able to respond, to contain, and begin to rebuild. And that's what we like to see. That's where the resilience comes from. And you don't want to wait until you've had it before you start building. That's what it boils down to.
Sorry, Trevor.
Yeah, I was going to ask you all, when you've had one of these incidents in the past, do you find that your organisation gets a better appreciation for IT and better loosens the purses a bit to help you actually correct the problem? Or do you find that you have to fight again years later? Do you get support from your organisation better because they've seen what actually happens?
Shall I take that one first? So you'll be amazed at how much a crisis can loosen the purse strings. But my advice is don't wait for the crisis. And picking up on what David just said about, having the tools in place, and not just the tools, but the processes to, respond and recover from these events quickly. I thought UWL was in a good cyber place. We had recently passed an external audit, as you routinely do these things, but it's not until it happens, until you really have to do the forensic analysis and really understand what's going on in your network, that you realise you haven't got the tools that you need, that you do need some massive investment in the next layer of cyber protection, if you like. So absolutely, when I went to the VC and said, we've got nothing running, I need some external help here, I need some tools, and I need to spend, a large 5-figure sum, oddly, I got it. Now, my advice to all of you is go back to your institutions and have that conversation right now. Get those tools in place, because it's a lot easier to do that. And the argument is, look at the cost to the organisation of when you have no IT, for whether it's 3 days, James, 5 days in my case, or any other time. So that would be my answer to that, Trevor.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rachel.
The other thing to think about is the resilience of your key documentation. So if your key documentation is in your data center and your data center is attacked and you've got no other place for it, where are you going to go and find your disaster recovery plans? That's the other thing. So a very good idea is to make sure that you've got a resilient place for all the documentation that's going to help you in a disaster, and that could be any type of disaster, fire, floods or whatever. So it's a really good thing to think about, the resilience of the stuff that's going to help you get back up. Yeah.
That's a very strong point for me, coming from King's College London. We had our own challenge back in 2016, and when we asked people how they were going to get stuff back from backup, they said they can't because it was on the hard drives that failed. So yeah, make sure you do things properly.
Yeah.
And I think...
Dave?
Very quickly, it's a really good idea to have a cybersecurity plan, which covers all of these elements, resilience, all of the areas that you're looking at to improve, so that you can have that conversation from a structured way. You have to have it written down. It's as simple as that. You can't make the business decisions unless you've got the evidence beside them. You also have to have proper intelligence as to which technologies you're looking for, how they fit in, how they're going to work, and add to that the human element, so that when you're having that conversation, you're saying, it would be really, really nice if I had so many pounds, but this is what you'll get for it, and you'll get real value from it, like any other business decision.
So Adrian, I was going to ask you one last thing at the end here, is did you work with other agencies, and what were your kind of key things that you found out of the incident that you had?
So what didn't we have? It was really to be able to go in and forensically look at the network and to understand the threat landscape. So I'll give you a practical example of what we can do now, and this will segue into a process thing, which is equally important. So now we've got some software. I won't say what it is because other vendors are available, of course. But we've got some software that identifies threats. They bubble up onto a dashboard. And a good example of this are users who logged in one place and then a short while later appear to log in from another country. Okay? So that flags them up as a threat and says, something funny going on here. Now, of course, what the software hasn't factored in is that most students use Netflix, and when they want to watch the latest American show, they just go on to NordVPN or whatever it is and watch it. So we found out that's what that is. So we've got these tools now that are sort of monitoring, scanning the network, almost every action, and every day hundreds of threats are coming in. Well, this takes me to the process example, which is if you don't put the process in to deal with the threats, what's the point in making the investment in the software? And then you need people and you need decision makers. And if you are identifying things that may be nefarious, you've got to be able to escalate them. You've then got to make the tough decisions to deal with them quickly to shut things down again. So I think that would be a good example of the sort of tools that you can invest in, but they come with consequences.
Yeah. I'd just like to make one further point in terms of, I mean, you probably all know this, but multi-factor authentication is the one thing that I think you can't do without. So the thing is to make sure that as many of your tools and systems are under single sign-on, and single sign-on then ties into multi-factor authentication. And if you've got that, you really are much better protected than not having it. And I know people in academia complain about having to use their smartphones to authenticate, but I think more and more people are used to doing it with their banking, and there really isn't any excuse. So, I think multi-factor authentication is what you need to get in place, and don't let anybody say they're exempt There's no reason to be exempt. If you don't have a smartphone, you get a token. Everybody needs to have that protection there. And then if you're under single sign-on, you can just cut off, and everybody loses access to that system if that's what you want to do. So I would really recommend that approach as well.
Yeah, that's a really strong point too. James, do you have any last points for us on what you would have done differently?
Well, not so much differently, but another sort of learning, and Rachel made me think of it when she mentioned the word resilience, and it's not necessarily about the documentation, but about people, and you also mentioned it's really hard to find good cybersecurity people to come and work for our organisations. We can't always pay the highest salaries, we can't always compete with the market. And during the incident, although we'd recovered most of our core systems within a few days, the work didn't stop there. There was a huge amount of effort going into continuing that recovery and looking at all of the processes and everything else. And the resilience of staff is so important, because people have been working such long days, they've been working long hours, and when they were going home to sleep, they probably weren't sleeping because they were thinking about, are these people still trying to attack us?
And they might be at home as well, so you can't bring them pizza because they're likely, if it's a weekend, they'll be logging in off-site and doing stuff. So
exactly.
You have to, and they all want to be heroes. I think that's the other thing. People who've got IT people who've got a real crisis really want to, burn the midnight oil and get it done and get it sorted. But sometimes they can burn themselves out, and you have to be really careful that you can sort of say, if it's going to take us 15 days to recover, not 14, well, actually, let's take 15 because we can't burn you guys out because, you're important. So you're absolutely right. And
to combat that, we've now made a sizable investment in an externally managed security operations centre to provide us with that 24/7 cover that
really good.
To the level we just couldn't provide ourselves, even if we recruited a number of additional people.
Can I just add to that point about people resilience, because I think it is so important, and it can be a very lonely role when you're the CIO or the network manager or the systems manager, when everything has crumbled and the whole organisation's pressure is on you. Get us back up and running, Adrian, do it now. And that's, I think, where organisations like UCISA, like HEFESTIS, can really help. Because what's the old adage? A problem shared is a problem halved. And there have been enough people that have been through this pain, James, myself, and many others, who are very willing to actually provide that moral support as well as any technical and best practice and learning. So I think it is a really important point, and something actually in the sector that's becoming a little bit more tricky, because now that the media have jumped on, cyber attacks, and you find your institution on BBC News, people don't want to talk about it, and that's understandable. Also, if you have cyber insurance, your insurance company may say you can't talk to anyone. And what we need, and I think we have, through UCISA, through other channels, is a really safe forum where you can get that help and support. So I would say that is a very important thing too.
Yeah, very important. So does that sum up your final key points there then, Adrian? Or
well, I mean, we're coming towards the end, and I think what we wanted to do is to give you some take-homes. And we've been talking about our experiences, but other people have been doing some work for us, and one of them is JISC. And JISC have come up with what they call their 16 steps for cybersecurity. And our advice, I think we're all united on this, is these are absolutely must-dos. And Rachel, multifactor authentication is on there. It's an absolutely must-do. So if you haven't got these 16 steps, then go away and think about what you need to do right now. I mean, these are just, if you like, the basics. And I think JISC have been writing to Vice-Chancellors. And so it's not just going in through IT, it's going in from the top down. And, some of us have learned some of these the hard way. We're saying, don't do that, go out there, do this now. So that's...
And I think actually you can share this with your Audit and Risk Committee. What we've done at Queen Mary is we've ragged red, amber, green status quite crudely where we are on each box. And then we've got some actions underneath each box which will tell us how we're going to get from, say, red to amber, and then what we're going to need to get from amber to green. then you can put some timescales on it, and then you can basically say in 6 months' time, if we hit all our actions, this is what the landscape's going to look like, and present it again to your audit and risk. So hopefully you can see some progress. But one of my cyber team actually said to me yesterday, well, actually, sometimes it might go the other way, because the more analysis you do, the worse you find out. So you could end up going backwards sometimes. But to be honest, it's better to know and to be fully armed with the risk than not. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
But they're a good set of boxes, I think. You might want to add to them, but at least you've got a good set of standards there to work to.
And I think, sorry, James.
The only thing I was going to add to that is the conversations that this unlocks at sort of Audit and Risk Committee, because we as an organisation are heavily teaching orientated, but we do research, and we do research in some subjects that, believe it or not, increase our risk profile around cyber. And I don't think, that's not on a lot of people's register, that actually, doing research in some of these either lucrative or slightly controversial areas does increase your risk profile. And that's something that needs to be on their radar,
Yeah.
whereas it hasn't possibly been in the past.
And I think, David, UCISA is partnering now with HEFESTIS to provide a bit more extra support. Do you want to tell us about that?
I'd love to. We are engaged with all of the higher and further education organisations in Scotland, and we've been invited by UCISA as a partnership, which you'll find out more in the conference next week with UCISA, to work with yourselves in improving cybersecurity. What do? We have a plan, we have a pathway that we work with all of our members to achieve, so that we're not duplicating anything, so that we're all working towards the same directives. Those criteria that you see in the JISC sheet, they're all very, very useful, but it's what it means to you that counts, and it's making it work for you that counts, and that's what we do. We run risk groups, we run operational and technology groups to make sure that we're consuming all of the detail in relation to cybersecurity. We also run tabletop exercises, seminars, webinars to support learning, especially on incident response, business continuity, and we're quite comfortable to do deep dives into backups, access, any of the aspects that you have. Now, I think the best way that I can put it is, it's a Morecambe and Wise sketch that you can still use, which is the Andre Previn one. We try to make sure that you're playing all of the notes in the correct order. And we're there from the service. We were actually devised by the universities and colleges in Scotland. We work for and with universities and colleges now in the UK. And we don't want you to have an incident to be able to release that joined up response that you're going to need with the technology, the tools, the people, the practice, the management in place. We want to help you get there without having to pick yourself up. And I've got to say, the efforts that have been shown around this room, this is one thing, the spirit that we've experienced is something that we like to harness. We like to work with that. It's very much a community. We all learn together, we all work together, we all get very, very scared together on occasion. I'm not going to say otherwise. There's many people who are very scared right now. But in preparation, and fortune doesn't just favour the prepared mind, it favours the prepared organisation. And we like to think that that preparation is saving our members a great deal of money, a great deal of time, and a great deal of lost sleep. It's working. We get measured against the Public Sector Action Plan, all of our organisations. We started off at a very, very low level, around the baseline level. Most of our organisations are well past target levels to advanced. And that is within the space of a year to 2 years. And that's the evidence of what we do. That's what we try to spread, that's what we try to share. And when something bad happens, everybody gets together to help, to support, to share, to advise. And I'm in the middle of it, having a nervous breakdown. But that's fine, that's my job.
But
So-
does that mean we're not doomed after all then?
I would like to say no. In 2 years, I've got to say, Scotland's been hammered as hard as anybody else. And at the start, one of us did get knocked out. There's no question about it. But now we've had a number over the past 2 years, and yes, they've hurt, but we've all managed in some way, shape or form to stand up, and all of us are now standing, and we're all stronger for it.
Yeah, sounds good to me. And remember as well, when things aren't that bad as well, you've always got UCISA group events and things to go to as well, where the community will work together. UCISA is the professional body for IT and digital practitioners in UK education. So we're a good group to work with, so try and look up some of the other events and things as well. We have 2 minutes left. Are there any questions from the floor that anybody would like to ask any of our panellists? I'll come over and hand you the microphone. That's probably the easiest way.
Firstly, thank you. That was really, really interesting. Just going back to the point about research and risk profile, I wondered if the panel had got any hints and tips about particularly the pressure to work globally with countries that aren't necessarily as robust in their cybersecurity as us. So any hints and tips gratefully received.
Well, I suppose as I mentioned it, I should probably answer that one. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we've partnered with an organisation who provide us with our 24/7 Security Operations Centre, and they have an approach that looks at the typical and some of the more common threats that actors who are familiar or working in those regions pose, and tuning our Security Operations Centre, our monitoring and our threat analysis to those sorts of threats is their first suggestion as to how you can respond to those kinds of things. If you've got people working in areas of the world that are sort of higher risk as well, making sure they are absolutely aware of the common types of threats and are more aware than ever of good practice around device security and what to do and what not to do when you're working remotely and all those sorts of things. People are often the highest risk, and particularly when they're working abroad or in those geographies where they haven't got the same sense of sort of personal security around them that they might have at home. Those would be my sort of top two, I think. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say.
All I'll say is cybersecurity is always a balance of risk. You're never going to be perfect. If you would, none of us would be here. We'd all be in a sealed room. So it is about balancing the risk that's appropriate for your business, but it's all about education. As James said, people are always the weak link. The tech is great, but someone will go and do something. And it's just making sure they're really educated so they understand what the risks are, and then putting the tech in underneath so that we can keep an eye on them.
Very true. For us, it's all about continuous improvement, and you know more about where your weaknesses and strengths are. It's sometimes very difficult to get them out, and applying the training and the support for each organisation as an individual, if you like, really bears fruit.
And on that note, we're just about out of time. So thank you very, very much for attending the session. Hopefully it's been useful to you. I'm sure you can find some of us wandering about afterwards if you want to ask other questions. Cheers, thank you.